In forensic accounting, the first thing they teach you is that money has a memory. Every dollar leaves a fingerprint, every transfer leaves a shadow. And when something doesn't add up, the smartest thing you can do is sit very still and watch where the smoke is coming from. I was 31 years old, sitting in my mother's dining room on a Tuesday evening in October, and the smoke was everywhere. My name is Wren Caldwell. I work at a mid-sized firm in Hartford, Connecticut, doing the kind of work nobody at parties wants to hear about. I trace embezzlement through shell companies. I find money that people swore didn't exist. I once spent 14 months unraveling a $40 million fraud committed by a man who used his daughter's college fund as a slush account. I am very, very good at what I do. So when my mother called me on a Tuesday morning and said in her syrupy voice, "Sweetheart, your grandmother wants to do something special for your 32nd birthday. Can you come by Tuesday after work, just family, nothing fancy?" I knew. I knew before I even hung up the phone. Because here's the thing about my family. They don't do nothing fancy. They don't do just family. And my mother hadn't called me sweetheart in 14 years. Let me back up. My grandmother, who I called Nana, was the only adult in my entire childhood who ever looked me in the eye and asked what I thought. She was a retired tax attorney from a firm in Stamford, sharper at 81 than most people are at 30, and she had spent her entire life watching her daughter, my mother, marry a man who treated her bank account like an open bar. My father drank, not the loud, throwing things kind, the quiet, pickling kind. He drank until his liver gave out 3 years ago, and when he died, my mother spent the funeral telling everyone what a wonderful provider he had been. He hadn't worked in 11 years. Nana had been quietly paying their mortgage since I was in high school. And then there was my brother, Tate. Tate was 3 years younger than me, 6'2", charming the way certain men are charming when they've never been told no. He had been my mother's god since the day he was born. When I was 9 and broke my arm falling off a bike, my mother made me wait 2 hours in the emergency room because Tate had a soccer practice she didn't want to miss. When I was 16 and got into a magnet program for math, my mother threw a party for Tate's middle school graduation the same weekend and asked me to help serve the food. Tate had been kicked out of 3 colleges. He had totaled 2 cars on my mother's insurance. He had a daughter somewhere in Pennsylvania he'd never met. And for the last 18 months, I had been hearing rumors, the way you hear rumors in families like mine, that he had gotten into something bad. Sports betting, online casinos, the kind of thing that starts on an app and ends with men knocking on your door. I hadn't lived under my mother's roof since I was 18. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in West Hartford with a window that looked out at a parking lot and a cat named Murphy who hated everyone except me. I paid my own way through UConn. I paid for my master's. I paid off my student loans by living on rice and lentils for 6 years. But Nana had stayed in my life. Every Sunday for as long as I could remember, I drove out to her townhouse in Avon and we ate pot roast and did the crossword. She was the one who taught me what compound interest was when I was 11. She was the one who paid my rent the month I had pneumonia and missed 3 weeks of work. She was, in every way that mattered, the only family I had. So when my mother said, "Come by Tuesday," just family, I went. Not because I trusted her. Because I knew Nana would be there and I owed Nana the courtesy of showing up. I drove out to the house in Wethersfield where I grew up, the colonial with the green shutters my father used to repaint every spring before he stopped doing anything at all. I parked in the driveway. I noticed Tate's truck was there. I noticed my mother's car was freshly washed. I noticed that the porch light, which had been broken for as long as I could remember, was working again. I should have turned around. I rang the doorbell because I no longer had a key, and my mother opened the door wearing a dress I had never seen before, a navy blue thing with pearl buttons, and she hugged me. My mother hugged me. I cannot tell you the last time my mother had hugged me. Maybe my college graduation, maybe never. "Wren, honey, come in, come in. Nana's already here. We have a surprise for you." The dining room had been set with the good china. The china that came out for my father's wake and Tate's high school graduation and exactly nothing else. There was a cake on the sideboard. There was Tate, sitting at the table in a button-down shirt, looking like a man who had been told to look like a man. There was my mother's friend Gloria, who I hadn't seen in a decade, perched on a chair with a notepad in front of her. A notepad. And there was Nana, at the head of the table, wearing the ruby brooch she only wore for important occasions, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not warm. Not cold. Watchful. "Rennie," she said, and she patted the chair beside her. "Come sit by me, sweetheart." The dining room had 3 exits: the hallway to the front door, the swinging door to the kitchen, the sliding glass door to the back patio. I noted all 3. I sat down. I crossed my ankles. I put my hands flat on the table. "So," my mother said, beaming, "Ren, we wanted to do something really special for you." Nana reached into her purse and she pulled out a folded piece of paper and she slid it across the table to me. It was a check, drawn on Nana's account at First Republic, made out to me, for $750,000. I looked at it, I looked at Nana. Nana looked at me. "It's the proceeds from the Avon house, sweetheart," she said. "I sold it last month. I'm moving down to Sarasota to be near my sister. I want you to have this. For your firm. For your future. For whatever you want, Ren. You earned this." I had been trying to start my own forensic practice for 2 years. I had told Nana, and only Nana, that what was holding me back was capital. The licensing, the office space, the malpractice insurance, the first year of expenses while I built a client base. I had run the numbers. I needed about $400,000 to do it right. $750 was generous. $750 was Nana telling me she believed in me twice over. I felt my eyes sting, and I made them stop. Because I had also noticed, in the half-second after the check hit the table, that my mother had inhaled sharply, that Tate had leaned forward, that Gloria had picked up her pen. Nobody at this table was surprised by the check. They had known the amount. They had known the date. They had been waiting. I picked up the check, I folded it. I put it in the inside pocket of my blazer against my chest. I said, "Nana, thank you. I don't have words. Truly." I hugged her. She smelled the way she had always smelled, lavender and a little bit of bourbon. She held on to me a beat longer than usual, and into my ear she whispered, "Be careful, Rennie. Be smart." I sat back down. My mother cleared her throat. "So, Rennie," she said, and her voice had gone careful, the voice she used when she wanted something. "We have so much to celebrate tonight, because Tate has some news too." Tate looked at the table. "Tate, honey, tell your sister." Tate looked at me. He had our father's eyes, watery and a little bit yellow, and I realized with a small lurch that he was already drunk. "I'm in some trouble, Ren," he said. "What kind of trouble?" "Money trouble. How much?" He didn't answer. My mother answered. "It's $312,000, Ren, and the men who are owed it have been calling the house. They've been parked outside. They came to my door last week and threatened me." "Your mother?" "They threatened your mother? Can you imagine? Mom? And we've been losing our minds, Ren. We haven't slept. We don't know what to do. Mom, stop." She stopped. The dining room got very quiet. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked. I could hear Gloria's pen moving on her notepad. I said, "Why is Gloria here?" My mother blinked. "Gloria's just here for support, sweetheart." "Gloria's a paralegal, Mom. She works for Marv Schultz. Why is she taking notes?" The pause was just long enough. "She's just here as a friend, Ren." I looked at Gloria. Gloria did not look up. I looked at Tate. Tate was staring at the check pocket on my blazer with the expression of a man looking at a steak. I said, "Tate, who do you owe the money to?" Tate said, "Some guys. Online. They came down from Providence. Names. I don't know names. Ren, Jesus, what does it matter? It matters because I want to understand the problem before I help solve it." The word help landed in the room like a coin in a fountain. 3 sets of shoulders dropped. My mother's mouth twitched into the smallest, most premature smile. "Got you," I thought. I leaned back. I let my voice get soft. I let myself sound like the daughter she had wanted me to be for 31 years. The pliant one. The one who said yes. Mom, I said, walk me through what you were thinking. And she did. God help me, she did. She had it all worked out. I would endorse the check over to her tonight in front of Gloria as witness. She had already drafted what she called a family loan agreement, which Gloria would notarize. The money would go directly to Tate's debt. The remainder, about $440,000, would go into a family trust that my mother and Tate would manage, and which I could draw from, with my mother's permission, for what she called approved expenses. It's just smart, Rennie. It's just protecting the family. You know how generous her grandmother is? You know she doesn't always understand modern money. We don't want this to slip through our fingers. I said, and if I don't sign? The temperature in the room dropped. Ren, my mother said. Sweetheart, the men who Tate owes, they know where I live. They know where you live. How do they know where I live? Tate told them. Tate had to tell them. Tate had to tell them. Tate did not look up. They told him that if the money isn't paid by Friday, they're going to find your sister. That's what they said, your sister. Ren, they said they would hurt you, so this isn't a request. This is me protecting both of my children. I let her finish. I waited a long moment. Then I said, very quietly, Mom, if I refuse to sign, what happens? She did not hesitate. If you refuse to sign, then I'll have to call Sergeant Pell at the West Hartford station and tell him what I told Dr. Reyes last month. That you've been having a breakdown. That you've been talking to yourself in the basement. That you came at me last Christmas with a kitchen knife. I'll have you held for a 5150, Ren, 72 hours. And while you're in there, your grandmother will be told that you cashed the check and disappeared, and the trust will go to Tate, because by then, sweetheart, you won't be in a position to argue. Connecticut doesn't have 5150s. They're called peckholds here. The fact that my mother was using California terminology meant she had gotten this whole plan off the internet. I noted that. I filed it, I said. I see. She softened. Rennie, please don't make this hard. Just sign. You'll get your money back. We're family. I looked at Nana. Nana was looking at the tablecloth. Her hand on the table was trembling very slightly. I realized, with a slowness that surprised me, that Nana had not been part of this, that my mother had told Nana to come tonight because Nana was the only one who could legally hand me the check, that Nana was sitting in this dining room watching her own daughter try to rob me, and that Nana had whispered, "Be careful," into my ear, because Nana had only just realized what was happening. The daughter in me wanted to scream. The auditor in me started taking inventory. I needed time. I needed legal cover. I needed to get that check out of this house and into a vault before Tuesday became Wednesday. I needed my mother to believe she had won, because a person who believes they have won stops fighting. I exhaled. I let my shoulders drop. I did the thing actors do when they want you to think they're crying without actually crying. I said, Mom, I just need a minute. Can I have a minute? She stood up so fast her chair almost tipped. She came around the table. She put her arm around my shoulders. She said, Of course, baby. Take all the time you need. We're family. We're here. She had not touched me with affection in 14 years, and now she had touched me twice in 20 minutes. I went to the bathroom. I locked the door. I sat on the closed toilet lid. I took out my phone. I texted my best friend Priya, who was a divorce lawyer in Hartford, and I wrote, I'm at my mother's house. They're trying to extort me out of an inheritance check. I need a notary, an emergency conservator petition, and a recommendation for a criminal defense lawyer. Call me in 5 minutes and pretend it's work. Priya wrote back instantly. On it. Are you safe? For now. Call me. I waited. I counted my breath. I noticed that the bathroom still had the same wallpaper from when I was a kid, little blue flowers, and that one corner had peeled back and never been fixed. Priya called. I picked up. I said, into the phone, in my work voice, Yes, this is she. Yes, I understand. Yes, I can come in. Can it be tomorrow morning? Yes. 8 a.m. is fine, okay, thank you. I hung up. I went back to the dining room. I sat down. I made my face look defeated. I said, "Okay, Mom. Okay, I'll do it. But I can't sign tonight." Her face stiffened. "Why?" "Because the check is for $750,000 and the bank requires a hold of 48 hours on any deposit over $500,000 for fraud verification. I just got off the phone with my office. My managing partner is asking me about a deposition tomorrow. I can't be hauled off to a hospital tomorrow morning, Mom. I have a job. Let me deposit the check tomorrow at the bank. Let me come back here Thursday night. We'll sign the agreement. We'll wire the money to Tate's people Friday morning. Everyone gets what they want." My mother chewed her lip. Tate started to object. My mother held up a hand and shut him up. She said, "Why should I trust you?" I said, "Mom, where am I going to go? You know where I work. You know where I live. You have my phone number. If I run, you call your sergeant friend on Friday morning and you have me picked up at my office. I'm not running. I'm just trying to do this without losing my job." Gloria, the paralegal, said quietly, "That's actually correct about the bank hold, Marjorie." My mother thought about it. I could see her thinking. I could see her weighing the cost of a fight against the certainty of a Thursday signing. I could see the moment greed beats suspicion. "Thursday," she said, "6 p.m., you bring the check. We sign the agreement. And Ren." "Yes, Mom. If you try anything between now and then. Anything. The phone call gets made." "I understand." I stood up. I hugged Nana. Into her ear, I whispered, "I love you. Don't say anything. Just nod." She nodded. I walked out the front door. I got in my car. I drove 4 blocks to the parking lot of a Stop and Shop. I sat in my car. I opened my mouth, and a sound came out of me that I had never heard myself make. Something between a sob and a laugh, and I let it happen for about 90 seconds. Then I stopped. I wiped my face. I called Priya. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me everything." I told her everything. The threat, the 5150, the notepad, the check. When I was done, she said, "Ren, listen to me. You are in a much better position than you think. I want you to drive directly to my office. I'm there now. Bring the check. I have a notary on standby and I've already called Dev Ramaswamy at Halberg Criminal Defense. He's clearing his Wednesday." "Priya, yes. My grandmother is in that house with them. Is she in danger?" I thought about it. "No. They need her. She's the source. They won't touch her." "Good. We'll get her out tomorrow. Drive." I drove. Priya's office was on the 8th floor of a building downtown, and she met me at the elevator with a coffee and a hug. The notary was a woman named Beverly who had clearly been pulled out of her dinner. Within 40 minutes, I had endorsed the check for deposit only, photographed it from 6 angles, signed an affidavit detailing exactly what had happened in my mother's dining room, signed a separate affidavit for Nana to review and countersign, and authorized Priya to draft an emergency petition to remove my mother from any position of access to Nana's remaining accounts. Priya, looking at me over the top of her glasses, said, "Ren, you're going to wreck them." I said, "I'm going to follow the money. And the contract is going to follow the money. And then the consequences are going to follow the contract." She said, "I'd marry you if I weren't already married." I went home. I slept 4 hours. I woke up at 6 a.m. And I went to my bank, and I deposited the check, and I sat with the branch manager, a woman named Tasha Rowland, who had been my client's accountant in a fraud case 2 years earlier, and I explained the situation. Tasha put a fraud alert on every one of my accounts and assigned a personal banker to monitor any incoming or outgoing activity for 30 days. At 8 a.m., I was in Dev Ramaswamy's office. He listened. He took notes. He asked 3 very precise questions about the threat of involuntary commitment. He said, "Ms. Caldwell, what your mother described is a Class D felony in this state: coercion, extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. If you're willing to wear a wire on Thursday, I can have a state's attorney on the phone in an hour." I said, "I'll wear it." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "She threatened to lock me in a hospital and steal my future. I'm sure." Wednesday, I went to work. I billed 8 hours. I ate a turkey sandwich at my desk. I called Nana from a conference room and I told her everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. And then my grandmother, who is 81 years old and 4'11", said, "Rennie, I had no idea. I am so sorry. What do you need from me, Nana?" "I need you to stay at the Marriott in Farmington tonight and tomorrow. Priya's assistant has a reservation under her name. I need you to not answer my mother's calls. And I need you to sign one document tomorrow morning that reroutes any further gifts to me through a trust I'm setting up with Priya." Done. Done. All of it. Done. And Nana, yes. After Thursday, I want you to come stay with me until you fly to Sarasota. You shouldn't be alone. She started to cry very quietly, and then she said, "Rennie, your grandfather would be so proud of you. He was a federal prosecutor, you know. He used to say the law is the only revenge a civilized person needs." "I remember, Nana." Thursday at 5:50 p.m. I drove back to my mother's house. I was wearing a wire taped to the underside of my left breast, monitored by 2 state troopers and an assistant state's attorney parked in an unmarked van 2 blocks away. In my purse was a folder containing what looked like the loan agreement my mother had asked for. It was, in fact, a loan agreement. But the security on the loan, in language buried on the 3rd page, in dense legal text my mother would never read carefully, was a lien against the equity in her house. A house, I had confirmed Wednesday afternoon through public records, which was held in a joint title with her dead husband, which meant the lien would attach instantly upon signature. Tate's truck was in the driveway. So was a black Lincoln I didn't recognize. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened it. She was wearing the navy dress again. She had baked something. The whole house smelled like cinnamon. "Rennie, Mom." I walked in. The dining room was set again. Tate was there. Gloria was there with her notepad. And in the corner, in a wingback chair, was a man I didn't know, in a charcoal suit, with the kind of face that doesn't change much. "Ren," my mother said. "This is Mr. Donato. He's a friend of Tate's. He's just here to make sure everything goes smoothly." Mr. Donato was the loan shark. She had brought the loan shark to the signing. I felt the wire against my skin and I took the deepest breath of my life. I said, "Hello, Mr. Donato." He nodded. He did not speak. I sat down. I took out the folder. I slid it across the table to my mother. "Here's the agreement," I said. "I had my lawyer draft it last night. It's clean. It does exactly what we discussed. You'll see the loan amount, the disbursement schedule, the trust terms." My mother flipped through it with the speed of a person who could not wait to sign. Gloria read more carefully, but Gloria was a paralegal, not a real estate attorney, and the lien language was hidden in a section about collateralized assignment of indebtedness. Gloria looked up, nodded at my mother, and said, "Looks good." My mother signed. Tate signed where I told him to sign as a co-beneficiary. Gloria notarized. Mr. Donato watched. When the last signature dried, I said, very calmly, "Mom, I want to say something before I leave." "What is it, Rennie?" "I want you to repeat for the record what you told me Tuesday night about the 5150. My mother frowned. "What? You told me that if I didn't sign tonight, you would call Sergeant Pell and have me committed for a 5150 hold. You told me you had already laid the groundwork with Dr. Reyes. You told me my grandmother would be told I had stolen the check and disappeared. I want you to confirm, in front of Gloria and Mr. Donato and Tate, that those were your words." The room got very, very still. My mother said, slowly, "Ren, why are you asking me this?" I said, "Because I want to be sure you remember saying it." And then I unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of my blouse, just enough, and I peeled the tape back and I held up the small black device the troopers had given me. The expression on my mother's face is something I will carry with me until the day I die. There was no shock. There was no shame. There was only the cold calculation of a woman trying, in real time, to figure out which lie would save her now. Mr. Donato stood up. Mr. Donato walked out the back door. Mr. Donato got in his Lincoln and drove away. Mr. Donato, it would later turn out, had been the subject of an active federal racketeering investigation for 11 months, and his presence in my mother's house with documented intent to collect a debt through coercion of a third party was the final piece a U.S. Attorney's Office had been waiting for. He was indicted 6 weeks later. The state troopers came through the front door 90 seconds after that. They arrested my mother for criminal coercion, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. They arrested Tate for conspiracy and for an outstanding bench warrant on a DUI he had skipped court on. They took Gloria in for questioning, and Gloria, smart woman that she was, gave them everything in the first 20 minutes. I stood in the dining room while they were being put in cars, and my mother, in handcuffs, looked at me through the dining room window and mouthed something I could not hear. I did not need to hear it. I drove to the Marriott. I took my grandmother to dinner at a steakhouse in Farmington. We ordered a bottle of wine I could not pronounce. She put her hand over mine and said, "Rennie, tell me everything." I told her. She listened. When I was done, she sat very still for a long time, and then she said, "You know your mother was always like this. Even as a little girl, she would take her sister's toys and tell me the dog had done it." "Why didn't you ever say anything, Nana?" "Because I was a coward, Rennie. Because I loved her, and by the time I understood what she really was, you were already gone. I could only protect what I could reach." We drank the wine. The lien on the house was triggered automatically when my mother defaulted on the agreement she had signed, which she did the moment she was unable to disperse the funds she had never received. By spring, the house in Wethersfield was mine. I sold it. I used the proceeds to fund the down payment on a small office building on Asylum Avenue, which is now home to Caldwell Forensic Accounting, LLC. My mother took a plea deal and is currently serving 3 years at the Women's Correctional Facility in Niantic. Tate pled out to 18 months in a court-ordered Gamblers Anonymous program. He has written me 4 letters from prison. I have not opened any of them. Nana lives with me now. She decided against Sarasota. She said the weather in Florida is for people who have given up, and she is not done yet. She has her own room with a view of the maple tree in the backyard, and on Sundays we still do the crossword. My firm has 9 employees. We just took on our first federal case. People ask me sometimes if I miss having a mother. I tell them the truth, which is no. I had a grandmother. I had a friend who answered the phone on the first ring. I had a notary named Beverly who came back from her dinner. I had a banker named Tasha who knew my name. I had a lawyer who would have married me if she weren't already married. I had a body of state and federal law built by people who understood, long before I did, that the worst things in the world are very often done by the people who are supposed to love you most. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when the dining room goes quiet and the smoke gets thick. I followed the money. The contract followed the money. And in the end, the consequences followed the contract, all the way home. I think a lot now about the woman I might have been if I hadn't sat very still in that dining room. The version of me who panicked, the version who signed because the room got too loud, because my mother's voice still had the power to shrink me back into a 9-year-old waiting 2 hours in an emergency room with a broken arm. That version of me existed for a long time. She lived in my chest the way a held breath lives in your chest. The night Marjorie slid that agreement across the table, I felt her trying to surface, and I made a choice not to let her. What I've come to understand is that nothing in that room happened by accident. My mother spent 3 decades teaching Tate that he would never have to face a consequence, and the bill for that lesson came due in the form of $312,000 and a man named Donato in a charcoal suit. She spent 3 decades teaching me that my worth was conditional on my usefulness, and the bill for that came due the moment she discovered I was useful enough to be robbed. Cause and effect. Every choice she made for years was a brick, and on a Tuesday in October the wall finally went up around her own house and she could not climb out. The thing I would tell my younger self, if I could, is that intelligence without courage is just a hobby. I had been good at numbers my whole life. I had built an entire career on noticing things other people missed. But none of that mattered until I was willing to use it on the people I had been trained to protect. The brain you sharpen on strangers means nothing if you cannot turn it toward your own kitchen table. And I would tell her this too. Decency is not the same as compliance. For most of my life, I confused them. I thought being a good daughter meant absorbing whatever was handed to me and calling it love. But there is nothing decent about letting someone harm you. There is nothing moral about funding your own erasure. Real goodness has a spine in it. Real goodness can sit across from a woman who carried you for 9 months and say, calmly, no, and not for any price. The grit part I learned slowly. Grit is not the explosion. Grit is the 4 hours of sleep and the 8 billable hours the next day, and the wire taped under your blouse, and the steady voice asking your mother to repeat what she said. Grit is unglamorous. It looks like a turkey sandwich at your desk and a notary named Beverly who came back from her dinner. Nana is in the next room as I write this, working on Sunday's crossword. The maple is red outside her window. I followed the money, and the money led me here to a house I own, to a firm with my name on the door, to a grandmother who is safe. Some inheritances are not the check. Some inheritances are knowing, finally, who you are when the dining room goes quiet.